Hi, my name is Denise Hurley, and I want to welcome you to Journeys. This show is a show about people that are in our community and that I wanted to bring in and let you know a little bit more about who they are that you might not know about just in a general day-to-day meeting with someone. So I want to welcome Jeff to Journeys. Thank you for coming in today.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
Oh, you're very welcome. And this is Jeff Cote. And Jeff is a student, practitioner, and teacher of many disciplines of the Asian healing arts. So, Jeff, I'm interested in finding out more about what attracted you to this field, this as a practitioner of the Asian healing arts.
Okay. I guess I could say it started with I was always, as a teenager and a young man, interested in my own health. I was interested in health in general, and I just wanted to take very good care of myself. I saw that some people lived for a very long time and other people didn't, and I saw some commonalities in there. One of the primary things is I saw that people that stayed active and ate fairly well and intelligently lived a lot longer than people that didn't, and they lived a higher quality of life. So it started with that. I had been an engineer after getting out of the military, and I wasn't enjoying my work. The idea of being an engineer was great, and I enjoyed the work of it, the environment, and being sedentary and sitting in front of a desk, in front of a computer, pretty much all day long didn't suit me very well. And I realized very quickly that a lot of my angst and my displeasure in my work really was more about the nature of it than it was about the work, or working. So I started thinking about what I wanted to do, and I knew I wanted to study natural health in some way. And because I believed that there was a way to attain radiant health without having to resort to interventive processes all the time, or at least have a minimum amount of interventive processes along the way. As I began to look around, I saw a few things that really stuck out. One, naturopathy was really just coming out. This was the early 90s. Naturopathy was just really starting to become more well known. There were a couple of colleges of it. Homeopathy was also becoming a little more well known. It was really predominant in Europe, what I saw there. And I didn't actually at first, despite having an extensive background in martial arts and continuing to practice, and was actually an assistant instructor for a very high-level teacher of Aikido, I didn't at first initially think of Chinese medicine. It just wasn't really on my radar. And then one day after a class, I just happened to mention to my sensei that I was thinking about a change and I just wasn't sure what to do. And he just looked at me, kind of oddly and said, "Well, have you considered Chinese medicine?" And it was almost like a light bulb went on.
Can I ask you a quick question? Sensei,
Yeah.
what is...
It's a teacher in
teacher.
in the Japanese martial tradition.
Okay.
It's basically the term of respect given to
Okay.
your teacher. It has a deeper meaning. I've not delved into the Japanese culture as deeply as I have the Chinese since then, because of the arts I ended up studying afterwards. So I know that there's a lot more cultural and somewhat spiritual connotation to that, in similar ways to the way that Chinese refer to shifu, which is the Chinese equivalent to the same phrase. In the Chinese, it refers to sort of like a father teacher. You're taking spiritual responsibility for the development of the student, and including material responsibility if that's required as well. And my understanding is it's similar in the Japanese culture, but not necessarily identical.
Okay. Okay.
Anyways, he suggested to me if I'd ever thought about Chinese medicine, and he mentioned a shiatsu practitioner that he went to see, which was an older Japanese woman, and I genuinely do not even remember her name, and shame on me. I only met her the one time that he just introduced me to her, and I just talked with her a little bit, and I really saw that it was meshing up with where I was going philosophically. I'd been doing a lot of reading about Zen, and Taoism both, and I was fascinated by both. I had done a couple of Zen retreats, and I was much more drawn to Taoism, though. I really, in terms of the reading, I read the Tao Te Ching and the Chuang Tzu, and I was, and Alan Watts's Watercourse Way, and I was very fascinated by that, and I saw that there was definitely a connection to the philosophy, and I felt like that was really something that spoke to me, and it's something I really wanted to pursue. I got the impression, rightly, that the Chinese believed that the health of the body was a mirror of the balance of the natural world, and that's probably the thing that spoke to me loudest, and that was really evident in Taoism. And so, at the time, I was dating a woman who had studied Tai Chi extensively with a man in Florida who had gone on becoming a Chinese medical practitioner. And so she gave me his phone number just so I could research it a little bit. And so I gave him a call. That man's name was Tom Turcotte. And he invited me to come down to Florida. Didn't know me from Adam, but he invited me to go down to Florida and just spend a week with him and see if it was something that I would enjoy. To kind of follow him around in his practice, follow him around in his other practices of Tai Chi and Qigong, learn a little bit from him. And that if it was something I wanted to do, then he would help me find my way there. He was connected to a school of Chinese medicine in Florida. And I felt like this was just a great opportunity. Well, turned out that Tom Turcotte ended up being a pivotal person in my life. In fact, he said some things that were instrumental to me. One of the things that he said to me was that if you're going to do something like this, be the thing you want to teach. He says, the way we create radiant health in other people is by learning how to create it in ourselves and then help them learn to cultivate it in themselves. And that gave me the entire lens that I was looking for. And that's really I feel like when you're going to approach healing or creating health, having a perspective and a lens from which to start from is instrumental. And as I looked at the Western medical lens, I felt like it was not really in alignment with where I wanted to go. Their definition of health is an absence of disease. Well, if you actually look up the etymology of disease, it's an absence of ease. So their definition of health is the absence of something. And I think that's a little muddy. And it felt muddy to me, and I think that's why we struggle with a lot of the allopathic health. Now, I think complementary medicine has begun to infuse a different viewpoint into modern allopathic medicine, and I see it undergoing some changes that are really wonderful. There's, in the course of my having started this and then moved through it over almost 30 years now, to observe the changes that have happened over this time is pretty remarkable. My teacher, my first teacher, Tom Turcotte, I believe his license number was barely in the double digits in terms of as far as acupuncture license in Florida. So that tells you how few people were doing it. And now we have tens of thousands of practitioners all around. So.
Could you explain some of the disciplines that you teach? Just because,
Sure.
Because I think you do a little bit of everything in your teaching. Is that?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot. The Chinese arts are vast, and there's no person that could teach all of them. They're just, you wouldn't even have time in one lifetime, maybe 10 lifetimes to study all of them. I am a Qigong therapist and a Qigong practitioner and Qigong teacher. And you could say that Qigong is sort of a very large umbrella that covers a vast range of activities. Tai Chi Chuan and Baguazhang, which are two other arts that I also teach, could easily be described as falling under that umbrella of Qigong. If you were to translate Qigong into English, you've got the word Qi, which a lot of people have heard of, but they don't necessarily really understand. The character for Qi is, of course, their language is pictographic, right? So the character for it is a pictogram of a pot of rice cooking and the steam And it's, the implication is it's a steam coming off of the rice. So it's this subtle essence of something that is vital to life. This, because rice is, of course, their staple food.
Right.
Right. So it's the grain of nourishment. And then grain has its own implication in the Chinese medical model as well, that the grain is sort of the ultimate expression of the nourishment aspect of being, what they call the earth element. And so that character in and of itself says that it's really about the life force, that which gives rise to continued vitality, right? And then the Gong is, it translates directly to the word work, but it's not just any kind of work. It's not labor. It would be work that cultivates something, like farming.
Right.
That's another expression of Gong. And so this is work that cultivates the vital life force. Okay, that's why you could see that it's a giant umbrella, and further that that umbrella has widened beyond even its most classical definition of work that cultivates the vital life force, because there are a lot of practices that begin to fall under what are rightly called Shen Gong, which is the Shen is referring to the spirit, but the spirit not in the sense of soul necessarily, although that may be an element of it. It's more about consciousness, the total non-physical self. Okay. And so, and there's a lot of bridge over. There are practices that involve that, which means they're about strengthening the mind's ability to focus, strengthening the mind's ability to perceive subtle experiences, strengthening the mind's ability to apply intent into action. Those are all part of that, and I teach all of that as well.
Okay, and how do you teach that?
Those types of things?
Yes.
Well, those are generally come about more one-on-one with people. I've done classes, and I occasionally do workshops on the Shen Gong and the Qigong, and I certainly teach Qigong in classes. Okay. But when it starts getting more and more subtle into what is the foundation and origins of what they call Taoist alchemy, which is about internal transformation. Okay. And that's related to the Shen Gong, internal transformations. Those things become very difficult to teach in a classroom setting, because it really requires, to truly teach it well, it requires a kind of relating to a person in a more direct way. You can speak about it in generalities, but every individual will, as they engage with the practice, will need very specific direction in how to make use of it well and safely, even, because there are ways to create deviations. I've seen a lot of books out there that teach deeper fundamental practices of internal alchemy from the Taoist tradition.
So is this a form of meditation, or?
Meditation is certainly a part of it.
Okay.
A lot of times in the West, particularly, but even in some Eastern practices, from what I've seen, people have this concept of the meditation of being a separating away from the body in some ways, right? And it really isn't. At least not the Taoist approach to it. Okay. There might be some separation in the body as part of the process, but inclusivity and inclusion is an integral part of the fundamental state from which Qigong practices arise. I don't believe it's healthy to disassociate from your body intentionally. I believe that there will be, you can arrive at dissociative conditions where your mind and body separate from one another, and you can put your mind on specific things or even send it. That's astral projection and lucid dreaming practices, etc. In fact, there's even Taoist dream yoga practices, some of which I've engaged thoroughly. At the same time, I feel like there is a natural process that you can go through to arrive at that, and that forcing those natural processes oftentimes for a lot of people creates various forms of imbalance. Okay. And so the Taoist perspective is it's always within a larger context of balance and harmony, both internally but also externally, and how you're able to function in the material world. And that's one of the primary components of health. Like mental health in our culture, we look at, people may have various patterns that manifest, but they're not really deviations or problems until they start to become a problem for you in your ability to handle life. And I would say that that's pretty much the same in Chinese medicine.
Okay.
So by over practicing or practicing without good understanding or somebody to guide you through that understanding, you have the potential of creating chi deviation in such a way that you kind of mess with your system a little bit, and the mind-body system itself can get awry, and it creates sometimes various forms of psychoses or ill health in the body. I've watched people create acid reflux, and oftentimes through overindulging in certain practices with too much force, trying to engage and make things happen the way they want them to, instead of listening to the natural unfolding, which is part of the Taoist mindset.
Okay, I guess the other thing that I found was interesting is you have had a lot of apprenticeships and mentorships in the years that you've studied. Could you tell us a little bit about your experience with those folks?
Sure. Well, I wouldn't say that what I did with Tom Turcotte was rightly an apprenticeship, because it wasn't a formal thing. We were he was somebody who was just very generous and kind to me, and I wasn't really understanding of the relationships of the Chinese style at the time. Consequently, I never really entered into a what I would call an apprenticeship with Tom in a classical sense. At the same time, there was an apprenticing that went on there, in the sense that he formed my initial thinking and perspectives on all of this work. And I owe him a debt of gratitude that I can never repay. At the same time, the first real deep apprenticeship I entered into was with one of my teachers at the School of Chinese Medicine that I went to, which was the Dai Institute of Oriental Medicine. It was in Oviedo, Florida. And his name was Dr. Hua, Dr. Hua Julian. And this happened because the woman who I mentioned earlier, she eventually became my wife. We were engaged at that time. We both moved to Florida. Just after we enrolled, and just within the first month of us entering into the school, we both enrolled. We were in an auto accident. And a person driving a car lost consciousness for no apparent reason, jumped the median on a highway and hit us head on. And then it was a 10-car pileup. I mean, it was one of those things that stops traffic, and television helicopters circle around. We were in a convertible. We had to be cut out of the car.
Oh my goodness!
She's my ex-wife now, but she shattered her spine, and I had a severe concussion with some memory loss that I still experience some of a little bit today. Long-term things, just gone. I don't recall them.
Sure.
But at the time, the doctors had said that she needed to have her spine fused, and that it would be many, many months before she'd even be able to get up out of bed. And she was very physical. She did Tai Chi and Qigong and Kung Fu with me as well, and with our teachers. And that she didn't want it to be like that. And so when I went to school, the next time I was able to go to school, which was, I think, a week, I ended up having to take a week off from the concussion. But then I went back and I talked to Dr. Hua. And I said that, I told him what the doctors had said, and was that there anything that Chinese medicine could do. And his response was, oh, yes, absolutely. That there was absolutely something Chinese medicine can do. And it didn't need to be that long before she'd be able to get out of bed and move around. And he said, but Qigong and Tai Chi would be what she'd need to do. And so, and then he said, and I want to teach you Tuina, which was a particular style of healing. It was a bodywork methodology. And Tom Turcotte shared a lot with me on that as well, because he was also a Tuina practitioner, very, very high level. And as I started to engage with that, I talked with Tom, and he gave me a lot of practices and had me start working. He gave me some things to work with, but then Dr. Hua had me come into his office, and I worked with him in his office on a regular basis. And basically I just practiced and trained Tuina, and he taught me techniques, and I worked on his patients so that he could focus on acupuncture and herbal prescriptions, and then of course he would do some Tuina too to show me how things were done best. But the whole idea was for me to learn hands-on, and I worked on my ex-wife twice a day, every morning, every evening, and sure enough, in under a month she was out of bed and doing Qigong on her own. She was doing Qigong even in bed, but then like a month later she was up and doing Qigong, and then she started seeing Tom and Dr. Hua as well as myself. And within 2 months, she was full-on Tai Chi. Within 3 months, she was doing Kung Fu. By the 5 or 6 months they were talking, she was doing acrobatic aerial maneuvers like hurricane kicks and tornado kicks and stuff like that from Kung Fu. And if you didn't know what to look for and you didn't know how to see the stiffness that was in there, you would never know that she still had 2 titanium rods in her spine, and her spine was fused.
Wow.
And that was the selling point for me. I said, this is clearly
this works.
This works. And and the orthopedist who did the spinal surgery on her was blown away by her result and her change. You know, he said some of it is, of course, because how athletic she was before.
Right.
But then he saw that clearly it was above and beyond anything he could have expected just from that. And so it actually ended up happening that by the time I started seeing patients in the clinic at school, he was referring all these injuries, all these back injuries, people to me,
To you.
for me to work on, because he knew that I did Tuina on her every day, and that I clearly had to have done something really good. And so I ended up, kind of flying through my clinic time and my clinic hours very easily, because I had a constant wash of patients at the
How long
time.
have you been doing this?
Well, I finished school in 95, 96.
Okay.
So, but while I was in school, I was doing body work anyways, because a body work license is, you only need 500 hours. So I went through all of that earlier while I was in school for Chinese medicine, and opened up a practice doing body work as helping to pay my way through school.
Sure.
I was teaching Kung Fu and doing body work, and that's basically all I've done since like 93 or 94.
Okay.
So I guess it's well over 20 years now,
20
and
years.
heading towards 25, and professionally. But if you go far enough back to how far I've been pursuing it, you go back into the Aikido and what I knew I really wanted to do, and was just trying and practicing and trying to find my way with it. It's been about 27, 28. So it's been a while.
It's been,
Yeah.
So I guess I'd like to talk a little bit about what you're doing now, the particular type of Tai Chi that you offer to folks right now. And I don't know how you pronounce it.
Which one?
What?
Oh, the type of Tai Chi I
Yeah,
teach?
that you...
Okay. Well, I teach Wuxing style Tai Chi.
Wuxing, yes.
Wuxing.
That's how
Yeah,
you say it?
it's actually
Wuxing.
something Wuxing. Yeah, it's actually something I developed.
Okay.
This particular style. I studied Chen style, Wu style, Hao style, but the first thing I studied was swimming dragon style, Yolong Gong Tai Chi.
Okay.
Dr. Hua shared that with me. I had some introduction to Yang style from Tom Turcotte, but the schedules didn't work out from my schooling, so that I couldn't really go to attend all of the classes that Tom had. So I started working more and more with Dr. Hua on that, and that swimming dragon style influenced my thinking on Tai Chi a lot. Swimming dragon is both a Tai Yi and a Tai Chi. And now the difference between that is Tai Yi is the separation of yin and yang. Tai Chi is the unification of yin and yang. And so I always viewed the entire practice as a way of understanding each energy within its own context individually, by kind of separating them out, and then understanding them, how they work together better, by re-putting them back together again, so to speak, consciously. The reality is you can't separate them. If you separate them, whatever you're separating ceases to be. It needs both yin and yang to exist. But what we're doing is we're really focusing on one aspect or the other within the context, and learning how to flow back and forth between them, so that you get a better understanding of how it's unified and connected.
Right.
So how do I teach it? Well, what I did, the reason why I created a style, and I don't know that it would rightly be called a style, because I certainly borrowed, if you look at the form that I teach, I borrowed a lot from the Chen style at the early stages, with the lens of the swimming dragon put on it. And then in the later stages of the form, it transforms into predominantly the swimming dragon style, with a Chen and Wu and Yang style kind of put on it, or lens kind of viewed through it. So there's been a lot of crossover. The thing for me, and the reason why I called it Wuxing, the Wuxing refers to a Taoist concept called Wu Wei, or it kind of implies that. Wu Wei is doing, non-doing. It's doing without doing. It's a basic fundamental principle of Taoism, that the Tao does nothing, yet nothing is left undone. That by following an essential authenticity of engagement with real experience without forcing, fighting, or striving, that we can unfold any intent into being and let it unfold if we're participating with the fullness of the rest of the web of life, or the rest of the Tao. And we're not trying to enforce a will on it, but rather it becomes a dynamic interplay. So that's sort of the essence of that idea. Well, I took that idea of wei wu wei and applied it to xing wu xing. Now that means form from formlessness. And so I shortened it to wu xing, to just meaning formlessness or forming. The idea is, how do we form? One of the struggles that I kept seeing as I encountered Tai Chi teachers was that I kept seeing them focus a lot on form. And I get that there's an important part, and I certainly honor that. And I'm not judging it at all. But for me, I felt like I wanted to get an understanding of the essential essence of what that was. Like, why am I doing this movement this way? What's happening there? And the classic Chinese way of teaching it is repeat, do it over and over again, sink yourself into that movement, and it will reveal itself. And there's certainly a truth to that. But as I began to teach at councils on aging, I realized that most people don't have the 10 to 15 years of absolute devotion to the practice for an hour or more a day, every day, to try to apprehend those principles. So I said, how can I convey these principles from day one? So as I mentioned, I was an engineer. In my typical engineering mindset, I started to dissect the fundamental elements of principle that I was discovering myself. And I started to explore ways to access individual principles. And I started to teach from there. And then I created the style, or the pieces of the style, at first, just pieces, that would help us to integrate those basic functional principles. You get this principle and that principle. Okay, this exercise may help you understand that principle, and this exercise may help you understand that principle. But how do we create something that works together to express both of those? Well, that's what the form does. So I started looking at the elements of the form and saying, okay, why would they start with this move? Why would they start with that move? Why would they go from this move to that move? And as I did so, I started to see an inherent logic. And as I began to understand that logic, I began to tweak it with the stylistic elements of the principles that I was also bringing in from Swimming Dragon, the Gong Tai Chi, into the Chen style movements. And I really loved the Chen style movements. I thought they were beautiful, powerful, athletic, if you wanted them to be, but they could also be really gentle if you wanted them to be. So there was a lot of versatility there.
And that was part of the art piece that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, how you do it brings the art to it. And everybody's got to bring their own to that. And mine, when I was younger, was, really athletic, and I really challenged my body. And I still do that to a certain degree because I enjoy it. But I also recognize that somebody 72 years old starting this art out is not going to be able to do that. Right? Not without hurting themselves. And so I had to bring that element, that real versatility, to how can you do it? How can you get to something underneath all of that? But keep the stylistic elements present. And so that's what led me to Wuxing. And so the idea is, I'm not necessarily my focus in my teaching is not to teach a form. We may get to a form. My goal is to teach people how to form the form. And you can do that in any movement, one movement. A famous Tai Chi teacher, Chen Menqing, who was probably the most famous in America, he was one of the first ones to really teach here in America, said that all of Tai Chi was contained within every movement. And so I took that to heart, and I wanted to find that. And that's what I teach. And I try to focus in a very classical way on teaching people one piece at a time. See, a lot of times in classroom settings, it's very different than if you had a traditional training as an apprenticeship
Right.
or a discipleship, or a really deep teaching with a teacher where you go every day and you train with them for an hour or train at their school for an hour every day and then go home and practice on your own. If you had that sort of environment, what you'd have is you'd have a student who'd learn one thing and they'd just repeat that one thing for a very long time before they, until they had it right. And they understood the underlying essence of that movement or
Right.
that action or the stance or the principle. That doesn't happen in the classes here. Because one, most people don't have the patience for that. They're not going to stand in one position for an hour.
Right.
I actually tried to do maybe not quite an hour, but when I first started teaching, I would teach my classes and I would have everybody stand for 20 minutes to a half an hour at the beginning of class. And my classes never got very big. I'd get new people in and then they would go away. And I felt like this really wasn't accomplishing what I wanted, because I really wanted to spread and share Tai Chi with people. So what I found is I had to go and meet people where they were. And so that's what I did, is I decided, okay, how can I create these movements and these exercises that are good on multiple levels? They're really good for the body. They're going to do a lot of different things for you.
Right.
Being like an engineer, being efficient. What can I do that will teach a principle, but also do a whole bunch for your body health at the same time, and teach you about the mind thing? And so every exercise I took, now these are exercises I took from various teachers.
Right.
Some of them I created, some of them I borrowed from different traditions. Some of them I got as a variation of an idea. I read a book called The Principles of Effortless Power by Peter Ralston. Fantastic book, revolutionized my thinking about Tai Chi. Was instrumental in my own development. I kept trying to get to a class of his, and the timing or money never worked out where I could do it. And so I decided to pursue it as if I were taking a class. I took his book and I read it. I read a section, and I would say, okay, I'm not going to go any further until I can actually implement this, until I can actualize this in real time, in real effectiveness and action. And so I'd practice the exercise, and through the practicing of the exercise, I found my own modifications that I felt worked better for me, because I had a broader understanding of Chinese medicine, and I was bringing in other elements that had to do with health more than just martial effectiveness, because his was all about the martial art of Tai Chi. So that's another way it's evolved and shifted too. My focus and study of Chinese medicine really caused me to kind of examine all the movements that were being done. And because I was trying to be extra efficient and have everything work on a lot of levels and layers at the same time, and be useful for specific problems, say, I began to morph the form. And over time I recognized that the forms that I was doing, they resembled my teachers, but they were no longer my teachers. And at first I had a lot of trouble with that. I had a lot of doubt, like, who am I to do that? And to this day, it still sits back in the back of my head. There's hundreds of years of these practitioners, and their lineages that carry down, and they're still holding to those traditions, and there's a lot of honor given to that, and I certainly honor them for that. And at the same time, my life and my path didn't evolve to where I lined up with just one lineage, one tradition. As you mentioned, I studied with lots of people. I couldn't do that. It just didn't happen. I would have liked it to, but it didn't, because of the shape and contour of the flow of my life.
Okay.
And if I felt like if I was going to be truly Taoist, I had to follow what was revealing itself for me, and not fight. I tried to fight. I tried to force things, and it always worked out badly. And so I learned not to do that. And so I thought that maybe this was the way things were meant to be for me with it. And what I attended to instead was my diligence. Like, could I be diligent in my practice? Could I be diligent in my examination? Could I always question my own motives behind what I was doing and why I was making those changes? And I can say with confidence that I have been fairly thorough at that. And so I feel a lot more confident today, but there's always the niggling doubt.
Sure.
That, that a Chinese teacher that might encounter me and my work would say, who are you to do that? And to which my response would be, well, I I'm doing the best I can with what I've been given, and what I feel from my heart I'm driven to do. So.
Very good. Okay, well, I want to thank you for coming in today, Jeff. This was fascinating. Such, just very inspiring to me.
Great.
What you've been doing and your teachings and your work that you've been doing. I am wondering if folks want to get in touch with you, how they would be able to do that, if they are interested in classes or private sessions or whatever.
Okay. Well, I can be found in a number of different places.
Okay.
I've got a Facebook page called Tai Chi in the Park.
Okay.
And that came out from, I was in the summer times when the weather's nice. I pick a park in one of the local towns. It's kind of moved around a little bit. It's been Shirley, Townsend, Leominster at one point really early on, where I will just pick a park, and on Saturday mornings for the summer or spring, summer, and early fall, we do Tai Chi in the park, and people can find me. So you can find that page, and that's another way, one of the ways to find me. I'm actually, as I mentioned to you earlier, I'm in the process of creating a Patreon page, and the name of that page is Jeff Cote, the Occidental Taoist. Because it's sort of a play on the accidental tourist type of thing. Because I fell into it. It was sort of an accident, and yet at the same time I sought it. And I'm certainly Occidental, so. And so that's another way to find me. I also teach at councils on aging and community centers all around the Central Mass area.
Right.
Yeah, that includes Shirley and Lancaster and Townsend and Harvard and Berlin and Clinton.
Okay.
And so you can always find me through them. If you contact those towns and the councils on aging in those towns, they can let you know about the classes that are there, but also how to get in touch with me as well. If rather than I'm sure I could write a number and all that, but I mean, I can give a number.
Okay.
Would that be okay?
Sure.
Okay. Well, my contact number then is 978-346-3369.
Okay.
And that's a simple way. And I'm also working on a website, but I'm in a lot of flux right now, ready for the next stage of my work. I'm trying to really expand out beyond the local area to where I have a more national reach.
Okay.
And that's what the Patreon page is all about, and that's my website's all going to be. And there's going to be a lot of video instruction that people can get a hold of.
Excellent. Well, thank you again.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed this.
You're welcome. Okay. And thank you to my audience for listening to our show today, and see you later.